17. Gorst had been through nearly every level of the palace and had discovered a few significant things. Most important of them was that almost all of the servants and guards had vanished. Only those he would have expected to see in the vicinity of his and Kentrell's corners seemed to still be active. When he secretly visited other floors, the halls remained empty, silent. Even the many courtiers who had clustered around the grand hall during Lord Khan's announcements could not be found. It was as if only a skeleton crew manned the vast edifice. The giant had not yet concluded his hunt, but had already seen enough that he knew he had better report to his captain. Control would understand what this all meant. Gorst admired his commander and friend immensely and trusted his judgment, except perhaps with Khan's daughter. Then it seemed that the captain on occasion lost track of matters. Of course, if she had focused her beauty on Gorst, the giant suspected he probably would have been even more befuddled. Battle was one thing. Women were 4, 5, 6 complex things all at once. He slipped past 2 watchful but unsuspecting guards near his own rooms, then, pretending to come from a side hall nonchalantly, walked into sight. Although he did not see their eyes move, Gorst sensed them suddenly taken in his presence. They were good, but not good enough. Reaching Kentrell's apartment, he rapped twice on the door. When no one answered, he repeated the action, this time much harder. Still, no response. While it seemed very likely that the captain would be found with Atana, Gorst nonetheless felt his unease grow. He could not imagine what he would do if now Kentrell, too, had vanished. Well, he could certainly think for himself. Gorst worked best when given orders. The giant had started to turn back to his own rooms when a hint of black at the back end of the hall caught his attention. He glanced in that direction, but saw nothing. Still, one did not survive long as a mercenary by ignoring such things. Reaching the location without alerting the guards proved simple enough, but trying to find the source of the momentary patch of black afterwards turned out to be much harder. Gorst soon began to wonder if he had imagined it. He could find no trace whatsoever in the hall, and unless it somehow managed to melt into the wall. And then the giant's sharp eyes noticed part of the door frame ripple. Curious, Gorst reached out and gently touched the area in question. The left side of the frame suddenly lost all but a vague semblance of normalcy, rippling so madly it almost seemed as if he stared at it through flowing water. A second later, even that vestige of reality faded away, and suddenly the battered, torn body of the necromancer Zail fell towards Gorst. The startled giant barely caught him in time. Zail groaned slightly, clutching at him with what little strength remained. "Get me," the slim, pale figure gasped. "Get me inside room." Making certain that no one saw them, Gorst carried the spellcaster into the room set aside for him. He quickly lowered Zail onto the bed, then anxiously looked for something to give the injured man. "Open the pouch, damn it!" At first, Gorst thought that the necromancer had spoken, but a quick check revealed Zail's were closed. The spellcaster's breathing slow but steady. The giant finally recalled Zail's disturbing companion and where best to find him. It had probably been fortunate that the skull had spoken, for when Gorst reached for the pouch, he saw that, like the spellcaster's clothing, it too had been ripped in several places. Hints of its grisly contents could be seen through the tears, and if not for some luck, Gorst suspected the contents would have spilled out long ago. Gingerly removing the skull, he placed it on the nearest table. "My thanks, lad. Didn't think there for a while we'd make it back in one piece." Gorst tried to remind himself that he spoke with a fellow mercenary, not simply the skull of a man dead for centuries. "What happened?" "Young fellow there tried to conjure up the spirit of old Gregis," Humbart Wessel explained. Only when Gregus didn't show up. He wasn't old, and he wasn't by far in a good mood. He tried to warn us, but right when he spoke, the very walls grabbed for poor Zael. Humbart went on to tell of a most horrifying fate that the necromancer had only barely escaped with the skull's assistance. Then the arduous climb out of the caverns and exhausting return to the palace. The tale would have struck Gorst as a half fanciful, if not else, that had gone on. Let no one tell you, the skull concluded, that this young one's not as fit as a fighter for all his being a spellcaster, lad. Zael'll be a good, sturdy man to have on your side in battle any time. Is there anything we can do for him? Well, see if you can find a small red pouch among the things he left here. Picking through Zael's meager belongings, Gorst found the pouch in question. He held it up. Aye, that's the one. Now, if there's no curse or wards on it, open it up. The giant obeyed, only after undoing the strings, realizing what Humbart had just said. Fortunately, nothing sought to strike him down or reduce him to dust. There, a small vial with a yellowish liquid in it? There was, right next to what looked like a dried eyeball. Swallowing, Gorst pulled out the vial, then immediately sealed the bag. Pour it down his gullet. I saw him use that kind of stuff once after a thorned hulk almost beat him into the ground. Of course, Zael did manage to blast him to splinters in the end. When opened, the thick, ugly liquid proved to have an odor well matched to its appearance. Wrinkling his squat nose, Gorst went to the unconscious figure and, slipping his other hand under the back of Zael's head, in order to lift the latter up slightly, the mercenary carefully poured the contents into the other's mouth. Zael coughed once, then swallowed everything. Suddenly, the necromancer's entire body jerked wildly. Dismayed and startled, Gorst pulled back. Thought you said it'd help him. The skull didn't reply. The jerking abruptly ceased, and Zael began to cough again. As he did, the peculiar wounds over every visible part of his body began to heal, then even fade away. The giant watched in amazement as, in but seconds, what little color the spellcaster had ever had returned, and the last of the injuries utterly vanished. Still weak but clearly recovering, Zael eyed the soldier. My thanks. And I don't get no credit, grumbled Humbart Wessel. It's like isn't like my fault I have any hands, or I'd have fed you the stuff myself. I definitely thank you, too, Humbart. The necromancer tried to rise, but could not. It appears I need a few minutes longer. Perhaps it would be best if you brought Captain Dumont to see me. There's much we need to discuss. Can't find Kentrell, Gorst admitted. Can't find anyone but you so far. The silver, almond-shaped eyes that did not remind the giant so much of Quoth Sin's narrow in suspicion. No one? Albort's gone missing. That worried Kentrell enough, so he sent me looking around the palace. Couldn't find Sin, couldn't even hardly find a soul anywhere besides on this floor. Seems the whole place is all but empty. Yes, that is making more and more sense, I am afraid. This brought a snort of disapproval from the skull. Now, you said that you once or twice, while climbing out of Nimir, you still haven't explained to me just what you mean. Zael frowned. And that is because I do not yet completely understand it myself. Gorst knew he understood less than either, but one thing of which he felt certain was that his captain had gone missing, and that meant only one course of action as far as he was concerned. I need to find Kentrell. It might be best. Come with me or not, the giant said, determination hardening. I'm going after my captain. The necromancer forced himself up. Give me just a short time, Gorst, and I will be more than happy to help you search. I think might be best if we left Ure and its shadow past. The Holy Kingdom seems to be anything but. Despite his impatience, Gorst agreed to wait. He knew that magic was involved, and knew that against such he had little hope. He could wield an axe or a sword well against any blood and flesh flow, but against magic he felt pretty much defenseless. Having Zael with him would help even the odds. Gorst had already seen how skilled the man was. It took the necromancer some minutes to recover his strength sufficiently, and a few more minutes to do anything about his ruined garments. Gorst expected him to magic up some new clothes, but instead Zael went to his pack and removed an outfit nearly identical to that which had been torn to shreds. Only the cloak could not be replaced. "We shall have to find you a new pouch," Zael commented to the skull. "I fear I do not have another large enough in which to place you in, Humbart." "Well, I'm not staying behind, if you don't." Gorst did not want to have to wait for them to finish arguing. "I got a big bag enough. It can tie to your belt, just like your old one." Zael nodded. "Then it is time to go find the captain and be rid of this place." It seemed to Zael that he had underestimated the giant. Gorst appeared far more clever, far more adept than the necromancer had assumed. The information he provided Zael concerning the layout of the palace not only matched the drawing that the spellcaster had studied, but corrected some errors caused by expansion and even evidently sheer mistake on the part of the one who had drawn the diagram. The mercenary had used simple tricks to evade the notice of the armored guards, but Zael felt that even such would slow their efforts too much. Thanks to the potion that Gorst had fed him, and whose contents the necromancer knew he had best never explained to the fighter, Zael felt almost as good as new. His wounds had vanished, and the only remnant of his almost catastrophic finish consisted of a slight twinge in one arm. Still, the necromancer felt confident that he could now not only mask himself from the sight of the soldiers, but do the same for the giant as well. They would save much time by walking right past rather than inching their way along the sides. While Gorst obviously did not entirely agree, he did not argue when Zael began casting. Using the dagger to draw the fiery symbols in the air, Zael strengthened his normal spell, then touched the mercenary with the tip of the blade. "Nothing's happened," complained the giant. "We are both tied to the spell. We can see each other, but no one else can see us. The same applies for most basic sounds, but I would not recommend shouting or sneezing as we passed. Abrupt and loud noises might penetrate the glamour." Still, a little reluctant, Gorst followed him out into the hall. Farther on, the sentries continued their motionless, tireless stare across the corridor. Zael could not help but admire their treading, so akin to his own. Each of the 8 men stood tall and straight, armed alternatively with a sword or an axe. They almost could have been mistaken for very lifelike statues. Their nearly identical faces and expressionless only served to emphasize that look and, in addition, had made Zael early on wonder if they were perhaps at all related. He and Gorst slowly walked along, shoulder to shoulder, step by step. They passed the first pair, then the second, without any notice whatsoever. The mercenary seemed to relax, and even Zael, who knew the power of his spell, felt some relief. Then something about the next guard's countenance made the necromancer pause despite the urgency of the situation. Gorst gave him a worried, insistent look, but Zael ignored it. He stared cautiously at the armored figure, wondering what about the man's face so bothered him. Unable to ascertain what it might be, he glanced at the opposing sentry, studying him. It suddenly occurred to him what it was that he found so disturbing and yet so difficult to identify. Neither guard had blinked. Zael had waited far beyond reasonable human limit, and yet neither had reacted like a normal man. No matter how well trained these guards might be, surely they had to blink at some point. And yet they did not. Zael wanted to tell Gorst, but fearing risking his spell once they were far past, they could tell the other of the disquieting discovery. For now, It behooved them to. The unblinking eyes of one of the guards suddenly shifted in his direction, meeting the necromancer's widening gaze. "They see us!" Zael shouted. Everyone moved at once. Gorst had his sword out and ready to confront any of the four they had already crept by. The one who had met Zael's eyes leapt forward, axe swinging, face completely expressionless. The other three moved in behind him, similar blank looks on each. Dagger before him, Zael muttered. A black sphere briefly materialized, then shot directly into the chest of the first attacker. The armored sentry hesitated, then continued as if unhindered. The results did not please the necromancer. Never before had he cast the spell of weakening and seen it completely fail. These guards were more than simply men, and, because of that, possibly more than he and Gorse could handle. If he worried about such things, the gigantic mercenary did not show it. In fact, where Zael's magical assault had failed, Gorse's considerable skill and strength made up for it. The first to reach the wild man fighter moved in with the obvious intention of quickly decapitating Gorse with his axe. Seemingly outfought already, Gorse waved his blade wildly about, leaving himself wide open. However, as the axe neared, the giant did an amazing thing. He let the head and upper part of the shaft come within inches of his throat. Then, with one meaty hand, stopped the axe in mid-flight, and finally ripped it from the hands of its wielder. Although disarmed, the guard charged forward. Keeping the handle foremost, Gorse slammed the sentry hard in the stomach. Metal bent in, and a gasp of air escaped the giant's otherwise emotionless foe. Dissatisfied with forcing his enemy to double over, Gorse swung hard, using the flat of his axe to strike the guard solidly in the face. A face that shattered. The fragments fell away. Within the helm, utter darkness reigned. To his credit, the mercenary did not even wait for the pieces to hit the floor. Quickly twisting the axe around, he did as his adversary had intended for him, slicing off helmet, neck, brace, and whatever might have held them in place. The now completely headless figure collapsed with a clatter onto the marble floor. "They're not alive!" Gorse shouted needlessly. "But they can be stopped," Zael returned. Now that he knew better what they confronted, the necromancer felt more confident. Still wonder his spell had failed. He had based his work on the type of enemy he assumed he faced. These were not men. No, they resembled golems of a sort. And as a necromancer, he'd become well versed in dealing with their like. For the followers of Rathma, animating a construct, a figure of clay, stone, or some other substance, had been an art in hand with their dealings with raising the dead. In many ways, animating a golem required many of the opposite elements needed to summon a spirit to revive a corpse. With the latter, one brought back what had once been life. With the former, one imbued that which had never known life with the semblance of it. Dodging the sword of his nearest opponent, Zael ran through the spell for creating a golem, then reversed it. Hoping he would not misstep, he shouted the words not only in the latter order, but completely backward as well, everything to create the opposite effect. The guard dropped his sword, and his hand, and his arms and legs and head and body. The armor scattered all over the floor, and the face of the golem had worn cracked into 1,000 pieces as it struck the hard surface. A second one nearly caught the necromancer while he stood admiring his work. The axe came within inches of Zael's chest. Only barely did Zael manage to spout out the altering spell again before the monster's sentry could try a second strike. Something different happened, though. The guard lost his axe, and his actions became uncoordinated, but he did not crumble as the first had. In fact, Zael could see him slowly recovering, his movements returning fluidly. The golem had adapted to his spell. Behind him, Gorse grunted as he lifted another adversary up into the air, using the spiked head of the axe. Had the guard truly been human, he would have been impaled to death, but the golem only struggled, trying hard to reach the giant with his sword. With massive effort, Gorse used the axe to throw the one construct into another. The force of his toss caused the other beneath to shatter when the pair hit the floor. However, the first rose again, a gaping hole in his armor where the chest should have been. He seized the axe left behind by his fellow and moved in to match weapons with the mercenary. Zael, meanwhile, found himself hard-pressed against his three foes. Reacting instinctively, he summoned the talon of Dragal, which had served him so well in Gregasmatsi's sanctum. The bone spear shot through the foremost golem, the one he had already slowed. The damage caused by both spells proved too much for the animated guard to overcome. The torso collapsed in on itself, then, as if a house of cards had been knocked over, the entire golem dropped in pieces. Knowing he could no longer use the talon, Zael immediately summoned Den Trag, the teeth of Tring Owl. The combination had perfectly finished the carpet beast and surely would serve as well here. But when the shower of swift, deadly shafts struck the pair, most bounced off. The necromancer could scarcely believe what he saw. He had heard no tale of the teeth ever failing. True, some of his missiles did pincushion the two golems, and had even managed to disarm the one who had wielded the axe, but other than causing some slowness of movement, the projectiles had succeeded in doing little else. It occurred to him that the similarities between the teeth and the talon had enabled the golems to adapt to the former as well. Zael cursed his stupidity, then sought some other spell not at all akin to any of those he had cast. He had to think fast, too, for although the animated sentries clearly respected the power of his dagger, its short length meant that they still had the advantage of reach. At the one who had been disarmed bent to seize the axe again, the necromancer's remaining opponent thrust hard with his sword. The tip of the long blade came within an inch of Zael's throat. He backed away, colliding with Gorst, who had been pressed back by his own remaining foes. An idea occurred to Zael, one he hoped that would not prove wrong, or else he would be sacrificing both their lives needlessly. "Gorst, we need to switch opponents." "Switch? Why?" "Just trust me. When I give the word." To his credit, the mercenary did not protest. Still back to back, Zael could feel the giant's body tense as he prepared to follow the spellcaster's lead. "Drive them back 3 paces, then turn to your left." Zael himself dove forward, his sudden shift in tactics causing the golems to step away. However, the necromancer cast no spell, but rather simply did not exactly as he ordered Gorst. Spinning around, he abandoned his foes, for those the giant had fought. At the same time, Gorst turned to confront Zael's original pair. Pointing the dagger at his two new adversaries, the necromancer unleashed the teeth of the dragon again. The needle-sharp projectiles tore through the golems, completely puncturing their armor and shattering the guards into 100 pieces that flew in every direction. Zael let out an uncustomary yell of triumph, as he had suspected. Once these had been not faced in battle, but had not adapted themselves to his particular spells. By switching opponents, he had outwitted their creator's handiwork, but that left Gorst with the pair that the necromancer had originally faced. Concerned that they might prove too powerful for the mercenary, Zael whirled around, already putting together a spell that he hoped would at least slow the sentries down. He need not have worried. Gorst had the situation well in hand, and one of the golems in hand too. His weapon abandoned, the giant had one of his foes upside down over his head. Without hesitation, he thrust the golem toward the floor as hard as he could, and where Gorst was concerned, that proved hard indeed. Helmet and false face crumpled into an unrecognizable jumble. The massive fighter tossed the rest of the body away, then turned on the final golem. Undaunted, the construct tried to cut a deadly arc with his sword. However, Gorst, moving far more swiftly than his form warranted, seized the wrist of the sword arm and tugged. As the guard fell forward, the mercenary slammed his fist hard through the emotionless mask with such force that his hand dented the inside of the back of the helmet. Seemingly determined not to take any risks, Gorst ripped the helmet off. Then he kicked with his foot at the creature's chest. The last golem fell back onto the floor and broke, limbs clattering in various directions, bits of armor spinning about. "Now what?" asked Gorst as he retrieved one of the axes. As you said, we find Captain Dumont. They hurried down the hall again, the silence and emptiness of the palace doing nothing to ease Zail's concerns. Surely the commotion caused by the battle should have sent more guards running to aid the others. Where were all those who had once inhabited this place? More to the point, where was Captain Dumont? In a place so huge with so many hidden passages, how could they possibly... What a fool he had been! Zail halted, Gorse nearly running him down in the process. Do you have any of the things of captains on you? Anything at all? If not, we'll have to return to his chambers. The giant brooded over the question for a moment. Then his face brightened. I got this. He dug into a pocket and removed a small rusted medallion with a picture of some bearded western monarch upon it. In badly worn script around the edges had been inscribed, For honor, for duty, for king and kingdom. Kentrell got it from his father. Carried it with him for years. Used to say it brought him good luck. He gave it to me after he almost got his head chopped off about a year ago. Said I needed it more than he did. Not exactly what Zail had hoped for, but if Gorse's aura had not yet overwhelmed the older one set into the medallion by Captain Dumont, then it still could be used in tracking the missing mercenary down. Unfortunately, their lack of time also determined that the necromancer make use of a far less accurate spell, one with the potential to be more affected by outside influences such as the recent change in ownership. Zail had to try, though. Holding the medallion in his right hand, he dangled the tip of the blade over the center, all the while muttering under his breath. Immediately he began to feel a tug, but toward watching Gorst. Irritated, Zail focused on Kentrell Dumont, picturing him as best as he could. Now the pulling came from another direction, an area near the grand chamber, but in an area which the necromancer knew little. Muttering a few more words, the necromancer tightened the focus on his spell to make certain, then nodded to Gorst. Did you find him? Holding the rusted memento before him, Zail checked the direction a third time. The invisible force continued to pull him toward the same path. He is most definitely that way. Axe gripped tightly, Gorst trailed close as Zail followed the guidance of the bewitched medallion. As they proceeded, though, the spellcaster noticed an unnerving peculiarity about the lit torches and oil lamps nearby. The flames flickered rather oddly, and Zail thought that the light actually looked darker, as if something drained it from its natural fury. Their path led them to a secluded door, through which they entered without hesitation. Before them, the pair found a passage descending below the main passage. A passage that neither could recall from the drawings. Gorst did not like the dim illumination that came from everywhere but nowhere, and even the necromancer felt a chill upon down his spine. But down they went, certain more than ever that they would find the captain. At the bottom, the duo came upon an immense iron door, the head of a fearsome gargoyle with features like those of the ones they had seen outside thrust out from the right side, a large ring in its mouth. Gorst put an ear to the door, a moment later shaking his head. Can't make out a sound. He tugged on the ring. Too strong for me. I'll just ruin the handle trying. Let me see what I can do. Slipping around the giant again, Zail leaned close with the dagger. He sensed great forces in play, not only around the door, but beyond. Zail! Came the skull's voice. I think... Not now, Humbart. No, can you see? He broke off as the ring suddenly slipped from the gargoyle's beaky maw. A shriek echoed through the passage. The necromancer lurched back as the beak snapped at him, falling against Gorse. A full-sized winged and taloned gargoyle leaped out from the door at them.